You're worthless to us, my husband and in-laws shouted as I failed to meet their expectations. They threw me out with nothing but a suitcase and divorce papers in my hand. I remained silent, until 4 years later when I stepped off a private jet, with a successful business in my hand and a gleaming diamond ring on my finger. Their eyes widened. Their pride shattered in silence. Sign here, here and here. Gregory's manicured finger stabbed at the yellow highlighted sections of the divorce papers while his mother Colleen stood behind him, supervising my destruction like a foreman overseeing demolition. The prenuptial agreement lay beside it, every clause that would leave me with nothing circled in red ink. My hand trembled as I picked up the Mont Blanc pen, a wedding gift from his family that I was about to use to sign myself out of their lives. You have 1 hour to pack, Colleen announced, checking her Cartier watch. Security will escort you out if you're not ready by then. The morning had started like any other in the Whitmore penthouse. I'd risen at 5:30 a.m. to prepare Gregory's breakfast exactly as Colleen had trained me 3 years ago. Egg whites folded precisely 3 times, toast cut diagonally, coffee at exactly 165 degrees. The routine had become so automatic that my hands moved without conscious thought, measuring and folding and cutting while my mind wandered to my third-grade classroom across town. Gregory had come down at 6:15 as always, scrolling through his phone while eating. He hadn't looked at me once. I'd thought his silence was just another morning of indifference. I hadn't realized he was avoiding eye contact because he knew what was coming. At 7 a.m. I'd been gathering my teaching materials when I heard Colleen's key in the lock. She never knocked anymore. This penthouse, despite our names on the deed, had never really been mine. She walked in with Victoria, her assistant, and a man I didn't recognize who turned out to be their lawyer. Allison, Colleen had said, her voice crisp as winter air. We need to have a conversation about your future. Or rather, your lack of one with this family. That's when Gregory had appeared from his study, carrying the papers that would end our marriage. He'd been preparing them for weeks, apparently. While I'd been helping Miguel Rodriguez with his reading struggles, while I'd been grading papers late into the night, while I'd been trying to balance my 2 worlds, he'd been planning my removal. You're worthless to us, Gregory said, the words falling from his mouth as easily as stock prices or dinner reservations. 3 years, Allison. 3 years of mother trying to mold you into something respectable. 3 years of embarrassment at every social function. 3 years of you choosing those children over this family's reputation. I looked between them, trying to understand how we'd gotten here. Just last week I'd attended the Pemberton charity luncheon as requested. I'd worn the approved dress, used the correct forks, made the appropriate small talk about vacation homes I'd never own. But apparently it hadn't been enough. It had never been enough. The teaching was supposed to be temporary, Colleen added, adjusting her pearl necklace. A brief indulgence before you assumed your proper role. But you've made it clear where your priorities lie. Yesterday you missed the hospital board meeting to attend a parent-teacher conference. That was the final straw. The conference had been for Mrs. Rodriguez, whose son Miguel had been missing school to translate at her medical appointments. She cried in my classroom, worried about her boy falling behind. I'd promised to tutor him during lunch to make sure he didn't lose ground. In that moment, her tears had mattered more than champagne and small talk with hospital donors. I was helping a family in crisis, I said, finding my voice. Gregory laughed, a sound sharp as breaking glass. That's exactly the problem. You think you're some sort of savior for those people, when you can't even manage to be a proper wife to me. Victoria had been documenting everything on her tablet, taking photos of me in my simple teaching dress while Colleen listed my failures. Wrong flowers in the entryway. Inappropriate books on display. Children's artwork hung in the hallway. The thank you card from Miguel on our Sub-Zero refrigerator had been the worst offense, apparently. Evidence of my divided loyalties. The prenuptial agreement is quite clear, the lawyer said, speaking for the first time. In the event of divorce due to failure to fulfill marital expectations, Mrs. Whitmore, excuse me, Miss Fletcher, retains only personal items brought into the marriage. I'd signed that prenup at 25, in love and certain we'd never need it. Gregory had presented it as a formality, something all Whitmore wives signed. I'd been too dazzled by the fairy tale to read the fine print. Now every clause designed to protect the Whitmore fortune stood ready to leave me with nothing. What about my teaching supplies? I asked. The laptop I use for lesson planning? Purchased with Whitmore money, Colleen said. It stays. Pie clothes. The designer pieces were gifts from the family. You may take what you brought into the marriage and anything you bought with your teacher's salary. She said the last words like they tasted bitter. I stood there in the living room where I'd once tried so hard to belong, surrounded by marble and crystal and people who looked at me like I was already gone. The morning sun streaming through floor-to-ceiling windows illuminated the space like a stage set, and perhaps that's all it had ever been. A performance where I'd never learned my lines correctly. Sign the papers, Allison, Gregory said, impatience creeping into his voice. Don't make this harder than necessary. The Mont Blanc pen felt heavy in my hand. 3 years earlier, Colleen had given it to me as a wedding gift, saying every Whitmore wife needed a proper pen for correspondence. Now I was using it to write myself out of their story. As I signed my name, Allison Fletcher, not Whitmore, never really Whitmore, I thought about Miguel waiting for me in my classroom. About Mrs. Rodriguez's grateful tears. About the stack of papers I'd grade tonight in whatever apartment I could afford on a teacher's salary. Those children needed me in a way the Whitmores never had. They saw value where Gregory and Colleen saw worthlessness. You have 58 minutes, Victoria announced, starting a timer on her phone. I climbed the stairs to pack, Colleen's heels clicking behind me to supervise. In the master bedroom that had never felt like mine, I pulled out the single suitcase I'd brought to this marriage. My teaching clothes went in first. The simple blouses and practical pants that Gregory had always despised. The comfortable shoes that had walked countless classroom miles. The cardigan with the small stain from when Timothy had spilled grape juice during reading time. Don't take anything from the jewelry box, Colleen instructed. Those are Whitmore family pieces. I hadn't planned to. The heavy diamonds and cold pearls had always felt like chains anyway. Instead, I packed the small silver necklace my grandmother had given me, the one I'd hidden in my drawer because it wasn't impressive enough for Whitmore standards. 45 minutes, Victoria called out. As I folded my few personal belongings, Colleen stood in the doorway like a prison guard. You could have had everything, she said. This life, this luxury, this status. All you had to do was give up that ridiculous job and learn your place. But my place had never been here in this penthouse with its marble counters and crystal chandeliers. My place was in a classroom with construction paper butterflies on the walls and children who looked at me with trust instead of contempt. 30 minutes. I closed the suitcase, lighter than it should be after 3 years of marriage. Everything that mattered to me fit inside it. Everything else had been a costume I'd worn in a play I'd never understood. 20 minutes. Downstairs, Gregory was already on a business call, my erasure from his life as efficient as a closed deal. The divorce papers lay on the coffee table, completed and witnessed. My key to the penthouse sat beside them. 10 minutes. I took one last look at the space that had been my prison disguised as paradise. The breakfast dishes from this morning still sat in the sink. Gregory's coffee cup had left a ring on the marble counter. Small signs of a life that was ending before lunch. Time's up, Victoria announced. The security guard who'd always smiled at me in the lobby now wouldn't meet my eyes as he escorted me to the door. Colleen and Gregory watched from the foyer as I walked out, pulling my single suitcase behind me. The taxi dropped me at a motel 6 miles from the penthouse, in a part of the city where the Whitmores' influence didn't reach. The clerk barely looked up as I paid for 3 nights with the emergency cash I'd hidden in my teaching bag months ago, a secret fund I'd started without really understanding why. The room smelled of old cigarettes and disappointment, but it was mine for 72 hours. That first night I sat on the edge of the bed replaying the last 6 months, searching for signs I'd missed. The fertility clinic visit that Colleen had scheduled without asking me stood out like a wound I'd refused to examine. Dr. Brennan's office had been all soft colors and gentle music, designed to soothe desperate couples. But Gregory had been anything but soothed. He'd sat in the consultation chair texting while Dr. Brennan explained our test results. I recognized the number on his screen. It appeared frequently on our phone bills, always explained away as client calls. The doctor's voice had been kind but clinical as she outlined our options. IVF hormone treatments, procedures with acronyms that sounded like corporate mergers rather than attempts to create life. The success rates are quite good for someone your age, Dr. Brennan had said to me. With the right treatment protocol we could begin next month. Gregory had finally looked up from his phone when she mentioned the costs. 50,000 for the first round, possibly more if complications arose. His jaw had tightened the way it did when a business deal went south. He'd said we'd discuss it privately, but the discussion had happened in the parking garage, his voice echoing off concrete walls. Mother wants grandchildren, but this is insane, he'd said, loosening his tie like it was choking him. I didn't sign up for medical procedures and hormone schedules. Do you have any idea what this would do to our social calendar? To my work trips. The way he'd said it, like potential children were another line item in the Whitmore family budget, had made something inside me crack. But I'd pushed the feeling down, told myself he was just stressed. The mind had a wonderful way of explaining away truths too painful to acknowledge. My phone buzzed on the motel nightstand. Diana, my best friend from college, the only person who still knew me as Allison Fletcher rather than Mrs. Whitmore. Her text was simple. Heard what happened. Breakfast tomorrow? The place we used to go. The cafe was 20 minutes from the motel, a small Vietnamese place where Diana and I had spent countless hours during college, planning futures that looked nothing like where we'd ended up. She was already there when I arrived, her accountant's suit immaculate, her success written in every confident gesture. She took one look at me and ordered 2 coffees without asking. I should have said something sooner, she began, then stopped, studying my face. You don't seem surprised. About Patricia Ashford? The name felt strange on my tongue. I saw the phone bills. Diana pulled out her phone, swiping through photos. It's been going on for at least 8 months. Maybe longer. The images showed Gregory at restaurants, theaters, charity galas, always with the same blonde woman whose pharmaceutical fortune made the Whitmores look middle class. These were all posted on her social media. She wasn't even trying to hide it. I stared at a photo from the medical charity gala 2 months ago, an event Gregory had said was for board members only. Patricia's hand rested possessively on his arm while they laughed at something off camera. They looked good together, both golden and privileged in a way I'd never managed to achieve despite Colleen's best efforts. Everyone knew, I said, not really a question. Diana reached across the table and squeezed my hand. In those circles? Probably. But you were teaching, Allison. You were living a real life while they were playing their games. The mention of teaching brought back another memory, sharp as broken glass. 3 weeks before the divorce papers, my students had organized a surprise appreciation celebration. They'd made cards and decorations, pooled their lunch money to buy a small cake. Principal Lawson had called the penthouse to invite me, wanting to make sure I could attend. Colleen had answered the phone. I could still hear her voice, cold and dismissive. Mrs. Whitmore will not be attending. It's inappropriate for someone in her position to accept praise from that demographic. That demographic. My students. 8-year-olds who saw magic in story time and victory in finally understanding fractions. Children like Miguel Rodriguez, who'd been so proud when he read an entire page without help. That demographic. I'd found the cards anyway. One of the other teachers had saved them for me, delivered them quietly after school. I'd sat in our marble bathroom that night, reading each one while Gregory and Colleen discussed my deteriorating judgment in the living room. Their voices had carried through the walls, planning an intervention about my unhealthy attachment to teaching. She's becoming an embarrassment, Colleen had said. Yesterday someone saw her at the grocery store with one of those children, shopping like they were family. I'd been helping Miguel's mother understand the nutrition labels, translating the English she struggled with. To Colleen, this was a betrayal of class boundaries. To me, it had been basic human decency. Diana ordered us food, remembering what I liked without asking. As we ate, she filled the silence with updates about her life, her promotion, her new apartment. Normal things that felt like dispatches from another planet. When she finally asked what I planned to do, I didn't have an answer. I need to find an apartment, I said. Get back to teaching full-time. Start over. You could fight the prenup, she suggested. Get what you're owed. But what was I owed? 3 years of being molded into something I wasn't? 3 years of small deaths as pieces of myself were carved away to fit the Whitmore mold? The prenup was ironclad, but even if it wasn't, I didn't want their money. I wanted my life back. That evening, I sat in my motel room organizing the few teaching supplies I'd managed to save in my bag. Lesson plans written on napkins during charity luncheons. A USB drive hidden in my purse with educational resources I'd created late at night when Gregory thought I was sleeping. These scraps were worth more than all the jewelry locked in the Whitmore vault. My phone rang. Unknown number. I almost didn't answer, but something made me pick up. Allison. The voice was slurred, uncertain. James Whitmore, Gregory's father. I heard what they did. Colleen and my son. I'm sorry. James had always been a shadow in the family, present but powerless against Colleen's iron will. At last Thanksgiving, after too much whiskey, he'd pulled me aside with something urgent to say. I remembered his words now with new understanding. You remind me of Gregory's birth mother, he'd said, gripping my arm. Too genuine for this family. Too real. I'd assumed he meant Gregory's biological mother had died. But James had shaken his head, looking around to make sure Colleen wasn't near. She was a teacher like you. 4th grade. Kindest woman I ever met. But Colleen. He trailed off, then suddenly grabbed my shoulders. Colleen made sure she never saw Gregory again after I left her. Paid her off, threatened her, destroyed her. She'll do the same to you if you don't play your role. He'd passed out before explaining more, and the next morning acted like the conversation never happened. But now on the phone his voice was clearer despite the alcohol. I should have warned you properly, he said. Should have told you to run the moment they started trying to change you. But I'm a coward. Always have been. What happened to her? I asked. Gregory's real mother? There was a long pause. Last I heard she was still teaching. Somewhere in Oregon. Colleen made sure she could never work in this state again. Another pause. Gregory doesn't know. Thinks she abandoned him. Colleen's greatest fiction. The line went dead. When I tried calling back, it went straight to voicemail. I sat in the darkness of my motel room, understanding finally spreading through me like ice water. I hadn't just failed to meet Colleen's expectations. I'd been doomed from the start. I was too much like the woman she'd already destroyed, the teacher who'd loved James before money mattered more than meaning. The motel room phone rang at 6 in the morning, jolting me from restless sleep. Principal Lawson's voice was warm but concerned. Allison, I know things are difficult right now, but your class needs you. Can you come in today? I'd been gone for 3 days. 3 days of staring at water-stained ceilings and trying to make sense of James Whitmore's revelation about Gregory's biological mother. I told her I'd be there by 8, then stood under the motel's weak shower, washing away the smell of cigarette smoke and despair. My classroom felt like stepping into another dimension. 28 faces lit up when I walked through the door, and Miguel Rodriguez ran up to hug my knees. Miss Fletcher, you're back. We made you cards. For 6 hours I lost myself in teaching. We worked on multiplication tables and read stories about brave mice and kind dragons. During lunch, I helped Miguel with his reading while he told me about his mother's successful doctor's appointment. These children didn't care that I was living in a motel or that my marriage had imploded. To them I was simply Miss Fletcher, and that was enough. But reality crashed back when I returned to the penthouse that afternoon to retrieve more clothes. Gregory was supposed to be at his office, but I found him in his study, rifling through his golf bag. He looked up when I entered, no surprise on his face, just mild irritation. The doorman wasn't supposed to let you up, he said, returning to his search. That's when I saw it, a credit card statement sticking out from beneath his golf gloves. Without thinking I grabbed it. The charges made my stomach turn. Harry Winston Jewelry, $42,000. The Ritz-Carlton Miami, Weekend Suite, $8,000. Nobu Maria Le Bernardin. Restaurants where a single dinner cost more than I spent on classroom supplies in a year. That's private property, Gregory said, but he made no move to take it back. I kept reading. The dates aligned perfectly with his supposed business conferences. Orlando in January. Boston in March. Miami just 2 weeks ago when he'd said he was meeting Japanese investors. My annual teaching salary was $32,000. He'd spent more than that on Patricia Ashford in a single month. Well, I asked, my voice steadier than I felt. Anything to say? Gregory actually laughed. He straightened from his golf bag, crossed his arms, and laughed like I'd told a particularly amusing joke. What would you like me to say? That I'm sorry? I'm not. Patricia understands what it means to be a Whitmore. She doesn't embarrass me by teaching poor children or wearing department store dresses to galas. The words should have hurt, but instead they clarified everything. This wasn't about my failures. It had never been about my failures. It was about Gregory wanting someone who matched his bank account rather than challenging his conscience. "She's welcome to you," I said, dropping the statement on his desk. "Oh, she already has me," he replied. "Has for quite some time." The charity auction 2 nights later was Colleen's masterpiece of public humiliation. I'd been summoned via text. Attendance was mandatory, dress code strictly enforced. The burgundy gown Colleen had selected was waiting in what used to be my closet, along with jewelry I was to wear and return immediately after. The ballroom at the Four Seasons was packed with the city's elite. Colleen had seated me at the donors' table, right in the center where everyone could see me. She stood at the podium, diamonds glittering under the lights, and began her presentation about the Whitmore Foundation's achievements. "Of course, our success depends on the dedication of all Whitmore family members," she said, clicking to the first slide. "Margaret Whitmore has raised $2 million for pediatric research. Eleanor Whitmore chairs 3 hospital boards. Patricia Ashford, soon to join our family, has already pledged $500,000 to our new wing. Soon to join our family." The words hung in the air while 300 people turned to look at me. I sat frozen in my borrowed dress, understanding flooding through me. This wasn't just an affair. This was a transition plan. The slideshow continued, showcasing every Whitmore wife's contribution except mine. When it ended, Colleen looked directly at me. "Of course, we understand that some family members have been too busy with their little jobs to contribute meaningfully." The auction began immediately after. Patricia Ashford sat 2 tables away, her blonde hair perfect, her laugh tinkling like crystal. When A Week in Tuscany came up for bid, she raised her paddle without hesitation. "50,000, she called out, looking directly at me. I escaped to the bathroom, but Patricia followed. She stood beside me at the mirror, reapplying lipstick that didn't need refreshing. "Gregory says the divorce papers are almost ready," she said conversationally, as if discussing the weather. "Don't worry, I'll take good care of him. And the penthouse will be gorgeous once I redecorate. All that marble is so cold, don't you think?" I looked at her reflection. Everything Colleen wanted in a daughter-in-law. Rich, connected, empty. "Good luck with that," I said and meant it. She'd won a prize I no longer wanted. The pregnancy scare came 2 weeks later. My period was late, stress probably, but I took a test anyway. The 2 pink lines appeared immediately, bold and undeniable. I stared at them for 10 minutes, my hand unconsciously moving to my stomach. Baby. After all those months of trying, of failing, of being deemed worthless because I couldn't conceive. Gregory was in his study when I told him. I watched his face transform from confusion to understanding to something cold and final. "Get rid of it," he said simply, returning to his laptop. "What?" I couldn't have heard correctly. "You heard me. Get rid of it. I'm not raising a child with someone like you. This is what your mother wanted. A grandchild. An heir. From the right woman," he clarified. "Not from you. Not now." When I refused to respond, he made a phone call. Within an hour, Colleen arrived with Dr. Brennan in tow. The doctor looked deeply uncomfortable as she set up a portable ultrasound in our living room, a house call that must have cost thousands. "Let's just verify the situation," Dr. Brennan said quietly, avoiding my eyes. The gel was cold on my skin. We all stared at the screen, waiting. After several minutes, Dr. Brennan cleared her throat. "The test appears to have been a false positive. There's no pregnancy." The relief that flooded both Gregory and Colleen's faces told me everything. If there had been a baby, they would have found a way to make it disappear. Legal pressure, financial coercion, whatever it took. The potential life I'd imagined for those few hours had never stood a chance. The formal intervention came the following Sunday. Colleen had gathered the entire Whitmore clan in the family conference room, the same place where business deals were discussed and family fates decided. Gregory's aunts, uncles, and cousins sat around the mahogany table like a tribunal. Uncle Richard started. "Allison, we're concerned about your inability to adapt to family expectations." Cousin Eleanor added, "Your teaching career feels like performative poverty. Like you're trying to prove something." "She needs psychiatric evaluation," Aunt Margaret suggested. "This obsession with lower-class validation isn't normal." They went around the table, each person adding their judgment. I was unstable. I was an embarrassment. I was damaging the Whitmore brand. Gregory sat silently through it all, studying his phone. Finally, Colleen stood. "We've prepared a solution." Gregory slid a single sheet of paper across the table. An ultimatum typed on Whitmore Industries' letterhead. "Quit teaching by month's end and commit to full-time foundation work, or face immediate divorce proceedings. You have 48 hours to decide," Colleen announced. Looking around that table at their cold, expectant faces, I realized the decision had already been made. Not by them but by me the moment I'd held those handmade cards from my students in that motel room. I didn't sleep that night after the intervention. Instead, I sat at the kitchen table watching the digital clock on the microwave count down my 48 hours. At 3 a.m. I made myself tea with shaking hands, knowing what my answer would be but dreading the consequences. Teaching wasn't just my job, it was the only piece of myself the Whitmores hadn't managed to destroy. The morning came too quickly. I dozed off at the table, my head on my folded arms, when I heard voices in the living room. Gregory's low murmur, Colleen's sharp consonants, and a third voice I didn't recognize. I walked out to find them arranged like a tribunal. Gregory in his gray suit, already dressed for the office. Colleen in cream-colored perfection. And a man in his 50s with a briefcase that looked more expensive than my monthly salary. "Allison," Colleen said without preamble. "This is Mr. Harrison, our family attorney. We've prepared everything to make this transition as smooth as possible." The coffee table was covered in documents. The prenuptial agreement I'd signed 3 years ago with yellow highlights marking every clause that stripped me of claims to Whitmore assets. The divorce papers, already bearing Gregory's signature in blue ink. Boxes lined the wall by the door. My belongings apparently already packed. "You have 1 hour to sign and leave voluntarily," Colleen continued, checking her Cartier watch. "Or we'll have security escort you out and ensure you never teach in this city again. We have connections with every private school board and most public districts. Your choice." Gregory stood by the window, his back to me, scrolling through his phone as if this was just another Tuesday morning. He wouldn't even turn around, wouldn't give me the courtesy of eye contact as our marriage dissolved. "Gregory," I said. "Nothing." "Gregory, look at me." "Just sign the papers, Allison," he said to the window. "Don't make this harder than necessary." Mr. Harrison pushed the documents toward me with manicured fingers. "Everything is quite straightforward. You retain personal items brought into the marriage. The family retains all gifts, purchases made during the marriage, and of course, anything bought with Whitmore funds." Victoria appeared from the hallway with her tablet, ready to document everything. She'd always been Colleen's shadow, but today there was something eager in her expression, like she was enjoying this. "I'll oversee the packing," she announced, "to ensure compliance with the settlement terms." I signed where they indicated, my name looking foreign on the lines. Allison Fletcher, not Whitmore. As my pen moved across the paper, I heard Victoria taking photos behind me, the artificial shutter sound of her phone camera capturing my humiliation. "Excellent," Colleen said once the last signature was complete. "Victoria will accompany you while you pack. 1 suitcase as we discussed." The bedroom felt like a crime scene with Victoria standing in the doorway, her tablet ready. She'd prepared an inventory list, every item categorized and evaluated. I opened the closet to find my clothes already separated. The designer pieces Colleen had chosen pushed to one side, my teaching clothes isolated on the other like contaminated goods. "Only items you brought into the marriage or purchased with your personal funds," Victoria reminded me, her voice carrying a note of satisfaction. I pulled out my teaching blouses, the ones Gregory had always mocked for being department store brands. My comfortable flats that had walked thousands of classroom miles. The cardigan with the tiny stain from when Timothy had spilled juice during story time. Each piece went into my suitcase while Victoria photographed the process. "Documentation for Mrs. Whitmore," she explained, though we both knew this was about humiliation, not legal requirements. When I reached for a silk scarf, Victoria stepped forward. "That was a gift from Mrs. Whitmore. It stays." "What about my lesson plans? My teaching materials?" I moved toward the desk where I'd kept my work. "The laptop remains," Victoria said firmly. "It may contain Whitmore financial information. It has months of lesson plans, resources I created for my students, which you created using Whitmore property." She pulled the laptop from my hands, closing it with finality. "Everything on here belongs to the family. I watched months of work disappear into her arms. Lesson plans for Miguel's reading group. Interactive presentations I'd spent entire weekends designing. Educational games I'd created to help struggling students. All gone. My jewelry box sat on the dresser, but Victoria had already placed a red sticker on it. "Whitmore family pieces," she said. "Though I doubt you'll miss them. They never suited you anyway." The wedding dress hung in its preservation bag at the back of the closet. I hadn't looked at it since our first anniversary. My hand reached for it automatically, not because I wanted it but because it had been mine, had represented hope once. "That belongs to the family archive," Victoria said, pulling it from my grasp. "Mrs. Whitmore insists. It's part of the Whitmore history now." I wanted to tell her it was my history too, that I'd worn it, had believed in what it represented. But the words wouldn't come. Instead, I watched her carry it away like she was confiscating evidence. My suitcase was barely half full when I finished. 3 years of marriage reduced to some clothes, a few books, and the teaching certificate I'd hidden in my drawer. Victoria made me open the suitcase for final inspection, photographing the contents like crime scene evidence. "That's everything?" she asked, disappointed by the meager collection. "That's all that was ever really mine," I replied. Downstairs, Gregory had disappeared, probably to his office, washing his hands of me as efficiently as any other terminated contract. Colleen stood by the door checking her watch. 53 minutes, she announced. Quite efficient. The elevator ride down felt like descending into exile. Samuel, the doorman who'd greeted me warmly every day for 3 years, stood stiffly by his desk. He'd already been briefed, I realized. His eyes stayed fixed on a point just past my shoulder as I struggled with my suitcase. "Mrs. Witt, Miss Fletcher," he corrected himself, not meeting my gaze. "Your access has been revoked. Please surrender your key fob." I placed the electronic fob on his desk, my fingers trembling. 3 years of coming home to this building, and now I was locked out forever. "The taxi stand is outside," he said to the air above my head. I dragged my suitcase through the lobby I'd once glided through in designer heels. Mrs. Pemberton emerged from the elevator with her tiny dog, saw me, and immediately turned toward the mailroom. We'd planned charity events together, had lunch twice a month. Now she crossed the lobby to avoid me. Outside, the morning sun felt too bright. I stood on the sidewalk with my single suitcase, watching taxis pass without stopping. My phone showed our joint account had already been frozen. The emergency cash in my wallet totaled $43. Enough for a motel room if I found a cheap one. The taxi finally stopped. The driver helped me with my suitcase, pretending not to notice when I counted my bills twice to make sure I had enough for the fare. "Where to?" he asked. I gave him the address of a motel I'd looked up on my phone, the cheapest one I could find that still seemed safe. As we pulled away, I turned back to see the penthouse building growing smaller. Somewhere up there, Colleen was probably already calling decorators to remove any trace of my existence. The motel room smelled like old smoke and industrial cleaner. The sheets were rough, the tap dripped, and the air conditioner wheezed. I sat on the bed and called Diana, but it went straight to voicemail. 20 minutes later, she texted, "Gregory's lawyer contacted me. Said I could face legal action if I interfere in family matters. I'm so sorry. They'd isolated me completely. No money, no home, no friends who could help without facing legal threats." I lay back on the concrete hard mattress, still clutching my teaching certificate, the only proof I had that I was worth something to someone somewhere. Tomorrow I would have to figure out how to survive. Tonight, I just had to make it through the darkness with $43 and the knowledge that I'd chosen my students over the Whitmores. The morning sun streamed through the thin motel curtains, revealing every stain and imperfection in the room that had become my temporary refuge. My teaching certificate lay beside me on the nightstand, slightly crumpled from being held too tightly through the night. At 7:30, I stood outside Riverside Elementary wearing the same dress from yesterday, my hair pulled back with a rubber band I'd found in my purse. Principal Lawson opened her office door before I could knock. She took one look at my red-rimmed eyes and wrinkled clothes, then pulled me inside without a word. The coffee maker in the corner gurgled as she poured 2 cups, adding sugar to mine without asking. "Third grade has been waiting for you," she said simply, handing me the mug. "They made welcome back cards yesterday. Miguel has been asking for you every morning." I wanted to explain everything, to tell her about the divorce papers and the frozen bank accounts and the $43 that had become $31 after the motel and taxi. Instead, I just nodded, grateful for her deliberate lack of questions. The classroom door had barely opened when 28 voices erupted in celebration. Miss Fletcher! Miss Fletcher! Miguel Rodriguez launched himself from his desk, wrapping his thin arms around my waist. We thought you weren't coming back. Amy Chin held up a poster they'd made, covered in handprints and messages in wobbly 8-year-old writing. We missed you, spelled 3 different ways, surrounded by crayon hearts and flowers. Something cracked open inside my chest. A dam I'd been holding back since signing those divorce papers. Let's do story time, I managed to say, moving to our reading corner. I opened Charlotte's Web, a book about friendship and loss that suddenly felt too close to home. As I read about Wilbur's loneliness, tears started rolling down my cheeks. I tried to continue, but my voice broke completely when Charlotte promised to be Wilbur's friend. Small hands patted my back. Timothy offered me his juice box. Sarah brought me tissues from my desk. Miguel climbed into my lap and said, "It's okay, Miss Fletcher. Sometimes grown-ups get sad too. My mama cries sometimes." For 10 minutes, I sat on the carpet surrounded by 8-year-olds who understood emotional pain better than the Whitmores ever had. When I finally composed myself, we finished the chapter together, taking turns reading as we always did. After school, I walked the streets looking for affordable housing. The studio apartments near school were all beyond my reach. Just when despair threatened to overwhelm me, I noticed a handwritten sign in the window of Chen's Garden Restaurant. Room for rent. Inquire within. Mr. Chin recognized me immediately. His daughter Amy was one of my brightest students. He led me up narrow stairs behind the kitchen to a small room with a slanted ceiling and a window overlooking the alley. The walls vibrated slightly from the restaurant below, and the air smelled permanently of garlic and soy sauce. $600 a month, he said, then paused, studying my face. But for Amy's teacher, $500. You good teacher. Amy loves your class. I counted my remaining cash, knowing I wouldn't get paid for 2 weeks. Would it be possible to pay after my first paycheck? Mr. Chin watched me counting quarters and crumpled bills. Without a word, he reduced it to $400 and told me I could pay when I was able. You help Amy with reading. This helps me, he said, as if he wasn't doing me an enormous favor. That evening, Mrs. Chin appeared at my door with containers of food. She spoke little English, but her gestures were clear. Eat, eat. The beef and broccoli was the first real meal I'd had in days. Later, Amy knocked, carrying her homework and extra supplies from home. Mama says you're good people in bad time, Amy translated, setting notebooks and pens on my small table. She says good people help good people. Amy started staying after school, helping me organize classroom supplies and grade simple assignments. In return, I tutored her in reading and math, watching her confidence bloom. The smell of soy sauce from downstairs, which might have once reminded me of poverty, became the scent of sanctuary. My evenings took on a new routine. After grading papers on the floor of my small room, I'd walk 8 blocks to the public library. It stayed open until 9 and the warmth was free. Mrs. Thompson, the elderly librarian, noticed me in the business section night after night. Starting a new venture? She asked one evening, setting aside books on entrepreneurship and digital marketing. Starting over, I replied. She began saving relevant books for me, placing them behind the desk with a sticky note bearing my name. The library's free Wi-Fi became my lifeline. I discovered YouTube channels about building online businesses, learned about passive income and digital products. The computer lab became my office, where I taught myself basic graphic design using free software. On my 3rd week of library visits, I met Arthur. He looked homeless, with worn clothes and a backpack held together with duct tape, but he sat at the computers typing with purpose. One evening, he noticed me struggling with a spreadsheet for tracking potential business expenses. "You're doing it wrong," he said bluntly, then proceeded to restructure my entire system. Turns out Arthur had been a Wall Street trader before addiction cost him everything. His mind for numbers remained sharp, even if his life had crumbled. We made an unspoken deal. I helped him write job applications and update his resume, while he taught me about profit margins, scaling businesses, and basic investment strategies. "Never put all your eggs in one basket," he said, showing me how to diversify even the smallest income streams. And always reinvest your first profits. Money has to work as hard as you do. The breakthrough came at 2 a.m. on a Tuesday. I'd spent weeks creating my first teaching resource packet, a unit on fractions using pizza slices that made abstract math visual and fun. I'd drawn every illustration by hand, scanned them at the library, and uploaded them to an online marketplace for teachers. The notification popped up on my phone. Congratulations! You've made a sale. $7.30 has been added to your account. I stared at the screen for 20 minutes, unable to believe it. Someone in Kansas had bought something I created. It wasn't much. After the platform's commission, I'd earned $7.30. But it was mine. Not the Whitmores, not dependent on their approval. I created another resource that night, then another. A reading comprehension packet featuring diverse characters. Math word problems using real-world scenarios my students faced. By the end of week 3, I'd made 17 sales totaling $312. Mr. Chin found me crying over my laptop in the restaurant after closing. He rushed over, concerned, until I turned the screen toward him, showing my sales dashboard. Good business, he said, nodding approvingly. You work hard, money comes. Slow at first like restaurant. But good food brings customers back. Good teaching materials bring teachers back. Mrs. Chin brought up extra dumplings that night, and Amy translated her words. Success tastes better when you build it yourself. I lay in my small room above Chen's garden that night, the sales dashboard still glowing on my phone screen, when I noticed a flyer Amy had brought with my supplies. The community center was hosting a free business seminar tomorrow evening, Scaling Your Online Business from Side Hustle to Success. I almost dismissed it, but the presenter's bio caught my attention. Marcus Reed, who'd built 3 successful edtech companies from nothing. The community center's multipurpose rooms smelled of old coffee and ambition. About 30 people sat in folding chairs, some taking notes on laptops held together with tape, others scribbling on the backs of envelopes. Marcus Reed looked nothing like the tech executives who'd attended Whitmore galas. He wore jeans and a button-down shirt with the sleeves rolled up, his presentation slides simple and clear rather than flashy. Most educational technology fails because it's built by people who haven't been in a classroom since they were students, he said, clicking through examples of expensive programs gathering dust in schools. We need insights from actual educators, but teachers rarely have the time or resources to develop solutions. My hand shot up before I could stop myself. What about platforms that let teachers share resources directly? Why do tech companies insist on creating content instead of amplifying what teachers already make? Marcus paused mid-slide, genuinely interested. That's exactly the right question. Are you a teacher? 3rd grade, I replied. I've been selling lesson plans online, but the platforms take huge commissions and don't understand how teachers actually search for materials. Stay after, he said. I want to hear more. The presentation continued for another hour, but Marcus kept glancing my way when discussing the disconnect between Silicon Valley and actual classrooms. When the room finally emptied, we were still talking, surrounded by stacked chairs and the janitor waiting to lock up. I've been trying to crack the educational market for 2 years, Marcus admitted as we moved to the parking lot. I have the technical skills, the funding connections, but I don't understand the daily reality of teaching. You do. We talked until midnight, sitting on the hood of his 10-year-old Honda, discussing everything wrong with current educational technology. He showed me prototypes on his laptop that missed the mark completely, and I explained why teachers would never use them. When I mentioned my students' diverse needs and limited resources, his eyes lit up with understanding. You understand both worlds, he said excitedly. That's incredibly rare. Would you consider partnering on something? Before I could respond, my phone buzzed. Diana's name appeared on the screen, the first contact from her since the legal threats. Her text was cryptic. Need to see you. Tonight. Important. Marcus noticed my hesitation. Everything okay? An old friend, I said carefully. I should go. He handed me his business card, a simple design with just his name and number. Think about what I said. I believe we could build something meaningful. I practically ran the 8 blocks back to my apartment. Diana was already there, pacing outside Chen's garden, looking over her shoulder repeatedly. She grabbed my arm and pulled me up the stairs to my room, checking the window before speaking. I shouldn't be here, she whispered, pulling a flash drive from her pocket. If anyone finds out, but you need to know what's happening. She opened her laptop, fingers flying across the keyboard. Spreadsheets filled the screen. Whitmore Industries financial records, columns of numbers that meant nothing to me until Diana explained. Gregory's been embezzling, she said quietly. For the past 2 years he's been funneling money from the education division to offshore accounts. Patricia Ashford's lifestyle isn't funded by her pharmaceutical fortune. It's coming from Whitmore Industries. I stared at the screen, watching Diana trace the money trail. Why are you telling me this? Because they're vulnerable, she said, pulling up another document. Their education division is hemorrhaging money. They've lost 6 major contracts in the past year because they don't understand the market. They're still pitching overhead projectors when schools want cloud-based solutions. She showed me email threads between board members questioning the division's viability. Contracts with school districts that hadn't been renewed. Competitors eating their market share. The mighty Whitmore empire had a massive crack in its foundation. I can't directly help you, Diana said, closing the laptop. The legal threats were real. But if this flash drive accidentally got left behind? She placed it deliberately on my small table. Well, accidents happen. After she left, I sat staring at the drive. Information that could destroy Gregory, but also insights into exactly what the education market needed. I texted Marcus, let's meet tomorrow. I have ideas. We met at my apartment the next evening. Marcus didn't comment on the small space or the restaurant smells. He simply set up his laptop on my tiny table and said, show me what you're thinking. For the next 18 hours we worked nonstop. Marcus coded while I designed user interfaces based on everything my fellow teachers complained about. We built features that addressed real classroom problems. Attendance tracking that worked offline, parent communication in multiple languages, progress monitoring that actually helped rather than adding busy work. At 2 a.m. Mrs. Chin knocked with food. She'd noticed the light under my door and brought dumplings and tea. Marcus jumped up to help her with the tray and she smiled approvingly at his manners. You work hard, she said to both of us. Good things come from hard work. Amy became our first beta tester the next day. She sat at my table using the prototype for her math homework while Marcus and I watched anxiously. When she finished a problem set faster than ever before, getting every answer correct, she grinned. This actually makes sense, she exclaimed. It's like having Miss Fletcher right there helping me. Mrs. Chun watched her daughter's excitement and started crying. She pulled $500 from her purse, bills I knew she'd been saving for months. I invest, she declared. Amy's future, other children's future. I invest. I tried to refuse, but Marcus understood the gesture's importance. We'll make you our first official investor, he said solemnly. You'll get regular updates on your investment. The breakthrough intelligence came unexpectedly 2 weeks later. I'd picked up a catering gig to cover rent, serving at a pharmaceutical company's weekend retreat. The pay was minimal but every dollar counted. I was invisible in my black server's uniform, just another pair of hands offering champagne and canapes. Patricia Ashford was there, drinking heavily by the pool, surrounded by other trophy wives and trust fund daughters. Her voice carried as she complained about Gregory. His mother still thinks education means chalkboards and textbooks, she laughed bitterly. The company's about to lose their biggest district contracts. Chicago, Houston, Miami, all gone by year's end. Gregory's too proud to admit he doesn't understand the market. One of her friends asked about their relationship and Patricia's response chilled me. Once the education division fails, the board will force him out. Then I'll find someone who actually has a future. I memorized every detail while refilling glasses, my server's uniform making me invisible to women who'd once pretended to be my friends. Patricia had no idea she was handling intelligence to the ex-wife she'd replaced. Information that would prove invaluable as Marcus and I positioned ourselves to fill the exact gap Whitmore Industries was leaving in the market. I walked back from that catering event with Patricia Ashford's words echoing in my mind. Chicago, Houston, Miami. Major districts all abandoning Whitmore Industries. Marcus needed to know immediately. I found him still awake in my tiny apartment, surrounded by code printouts and empty coffee cups. We need to launch now, I said, pulling off the catering uniform. Not next month. Now. Marcus looked up from his laptop, seeing something in my expression that made him close the screen. What happened? I told him everything Patricia had revealed, watching his eyes widen as he understood the opportunity. 3 major districts would be looking for new educational technology solutions within months. If we could establish ourselves before then, we'd be perfectly positioned. The app's only at 90%, he said, already pulling up our development timeline. Teachers don't need perfect. They need functional and understanding. Launch it. At 11:47 p.m. on a Thursday, Marcus pushed the button that made Common Core Solutions live in the App Store. We'd sent messages to exactly 5 teachers I knew personally, asking them to try it and share if they found it helpful. Then we waited. By morning we had 53 downloads. By noon, 200. Teachers were sharing it in Facebook groups and education forums with comments that made me tear up. Finally, someone who understands we need simplicity, not complications. This was clearly made by an actual teacher. It took my student 30 seconds to understand the interface. Principal Lawson called me during lunch duty. "Allison, this app of yours, the 4th grade teachers are raving about it. Would you consider letting us pilot it school-wide?" Within 48 hours we had 500 downloads purely from word of mouth. Marcus set up alerts on his phone for every download, and the pinging became constant background music in my small room. We took turns sleeping on my floor, 4 hours each while the other monitored server loads and responded to user feedback. "Look at this," Marcus said at 3 a.m. on day 3, showing me a review from a teacher in Nevada. She says it's the first edtech tool that hasn't made her want to throw her laptop out the window. Every positive review felt like a tiny rebellion against the Whitmore's world, where value was measured in stock prices rather than student progress. These teachers didn't care about my pedigree or my divorce. They cared that our app actually worked in the chaos of real classrooms. The explosion came on day 12. I was teaching my morning lesson when Marcus started calling repeatedly. I finally answered during recess and his voice was breathless with excitement. "Janet Morrison just wrote about us." Janet Morrison ran Teachers First, an education blog with over 100,000 subscribers. Her daughter's 2nd grade teacher had recommended our app, and Janet had spent a week testing it before writing her review. The headline read, "Common Core Solutions, revolutionary in its simplicity and understanding of actual teaching needs." She called it revolutionary, Marcus repeated as if saying it again would make it more real. Her review was thorough and honest, praising our intuitive design while noting areas for improvement. But her conclusion made me sit down on the playground bench. This is what happens when actual educators have a voice in technology development. Every district should be paying attention. Our servers crashed within an hour. Marcus scrambled to scale our infrastructure while I fielded calls from my classroom phone during lunch. Districts wanted demos. Principals wanted pricing. Teachers wanted to know if we'd expand to other grade levels. By the time school ended, we'd passed 50,000 downloads. "We need to incorporate," Marcus said that evening, both of us exhausted but exhilarated. "This isn't a side project anymore." We filed the paperwork for Common Core Solutions LLC, using the intelligence Diana had accidentally left behind to identify which districts were abandoning Whitmore contracts. Chicago Public Schools was first on our list, followed by Houston Independent and Miami-Dade. Each had specific pain points with their current systems that our app already addressed. By the time we hit 100,000 downloads, my tiny apartment couldn't contain our operation anymore. We rented a small office space above a pizza shop, furnished with desks from a closing startup and whiteboards from a university surplus sale. It wasn't the Whitmore penthouse, but it was ours. 3 months after launch, we closed our first major district deal. Miami-Dade County Public Schools, the 4th largest district in the nation, signed a 3-year contract worth $2.8 million. Marcus and I sat in our empty office at 3 a.m. after the signing, too exhausted to celebrate properly. "I need to tell you something," Marcus said suddenly, his voice serious. My stomach dropped. Had he found a problem with the contract? A bug in our system? "I know who you were," he said quietly. "I Googled you after our first meeting at the community center. I know about Gregory Whitmore, about the divorce, about being thrown out with nothing." The office felt airless. I'd never told him about my past, hoping to keep my new life separate from my old shame. "Why didn't you say anything?" "Because it didn't matter. What mattered was the woman standing in front of me with brilliant ideas and the determination to reshape education technology. I didn't see a discarded ex-wife. I saw someone rebuilding herself into someone extraordinary. He pulled something from his pocket. A simple silver ring, nothing like the ostentatious diamond Gregory had given me. I'm falling in love with that woman. The one who cries over student success stories. The one who works 18-hour days to make teachers' lives easier. The one who turned rejection into rocket fuel. He knelt between our whiteboards covered in growth projections and user feedback. Be my partner in everything, not just business. The venture capitalists started calling the next week. Our user base had hit 1 million and Silicon Valley had noticed. We took meetings in our pizza-scented office, Marcus in his only suit and me in my teaching dress that had become my lucky outfit. The most memorable was Rebecca Chin, no relation to my landlords, who'd built 3 successful companies after her husband tried to force her out of their first startup. She looked at our numbers, our user testimonials, and our growth trajectory, then looked at me with knowing eyes. I know that look, she said privately while Marcus discussed terms with her team. Someone underestimated you catastrophically. The controlled anger, the precise execution, the refusal to fail. I had the same look 15 years ago. She offered $10 million for 30% equity, valuing Common Core Solutions at $33 million. Make them regret it, she whispered as we shook hands. I signed the papers as Allison Fletcher, my maiden name legally restored the week before. As the ink dried, I thought about Colleen calling me worthless, about Gregory laughing at my teaching salary, about Victoria photographing my humiliation. They'd valued me at nothing. The market had just valued my company at $33 million. Marcus found me on the office roof that night looking out at the city lights. Any regrets about moving so fast? None, I said, spinning the simple silver ring on my finger. We're just getting started. The city lights sparkled below our office rooftop as Marcus and I stood together, the weight of our $33 million valuation settling into reality. The next morning I walked into our expanded office space to find a map of the United States covering an entire wall. Marcus had installed it overnight with color-coded pins ready to track our growth. Every district we win gets a pin, he explained, handing me a box of blue markers. Your war room as requested. I placed the first pin in Miami-Dade, then added 3 more for smaller districts we'd quietly acquired in the past week. Each one represented a district that had previously contracted with Whitmore Industries. The intelligence Diana had left behind proved invaluable. We knew exactly when contracts expired and what pain points had driven districts away from the Whitmores. The San Diego Unified School District called that afternoon. Dr. Patricia Hernandez, the superintendent, had a reputation for cutting through corporate nonsense. Her assistant scheduled a video call for the next morning, warning us that Dr. Hernandez valued substance over style. Whitmore Industries pitched us last month, Dr. Hernandez said within minutes of our call starting. 40 slides of graphics and buzzwords, not one person who'd actually been in a classroom. They kept talking about leveraging synergies and optimizing educational outcomes. I asked them what they'd do about English language learners, and they suggested we needed a separate premium package. Marcus shared our screen showing the multilingual features we'd built into our base product. I explained how teachers could switch between languages instantly, how parents received updates in their preferred language automatically. Dr. Hernandez leaned forward, actually taking notes. You actually understand our teachers' needs, she said. When can you start implementation? Another blue pin went on the map. By week's end we'd added 7 more, all former Whitmore clients. I kept their old contracts in a filing cabinet, studying what they'd offered versus what schools actually needed. The gap was staggering. Whitmore had been selling what they thought education should be, not supporting what it actually was. Saturdays remained sacred. Despite our success, I returned to my old classroom every weekend to volunteer. Principal Lawson had offered me a paid consulting position, but I preferred keeping it simple. Just Miss Fletcher helping with reading groups and math tutoring. Miguel Rodriguez had transformed in the months since our app launched. The boy who'd struggled with reading now devoured books, and his math scores had jumped 2 grade levels. One Saturday he stayed after our session with his mother's phone, asking if he could make a video. I want to tell other kids about the app, he said earnestly. How it helps when you miss school or don't understand something. The video was unpolished and authentic. Miguel at his kitchen table, demonstrating how he used Common Core solutions to catch up after his mother's medical appointments. His mother added her perspective in Spanish, tears in her eyes as she explained how the app had given her son confidence. I posted it on our company blog without expecting much response. Within 72 hours, it had been shared 50,000 times. Teachers across the country were showing it to their administrators. Parents were demanding it at school board meetings. Miguel became an accidental spokesperson for accessible education technology. Amy Chen took this as a challenge. For her district's technology fair, she created a presentation comparing different educational apps, with Common Core solutions as her focus. The 8-year-old stood before judges including high school students and calmly explained user interface design and accessibility features. "Miss Fletcher taught me business," she told the bewildered judges when they asked how she knew these concepts. "She says good business means solving real problems for real people." Amy won first place, defeating competitors twice her age. Mr. Chin framed the certificate in the restaurant, telling every customer about his daughter's victory and the teacher-turned-CEO who'd inspired her. The Education Technology Conference in Boston should have been routine. Marcus and I were presenting to a room of district administrators, demonstrating our latest features. During the lunch break, I went to the restroom while Marcus grabbed coffee. When I returned, I found Colleen Whitmore standing at our booth, her manicured fingers tracing our display materials. She hadn't noticed me approaching, too focused on charming Marcus. I stopped behind a display banner, close enough to hear but hidden from view. "A talent like yours is wasted on small ventures," she purred, the same tone she'd used to criticize my teaching. "Whitmore Industries could offer you triple your current salary, full benefits and resources you couldn't imagine." Marcus pulled out his phone casually and I realized he was recording. "That's a generous offer, Mrs. Whitmore. May I ask why you're recruiting at a competitor's booth?" Colleen's laugh was brittle. "Let's be frank. Our education division is struggling. We need someone who understands modern technology, someone who can revitalize our offerings. Your little company has been surprisingly effective at capturing market share. My partner and I are quite satisfied with our success," Marcus responded evenly. "Partner?" Colleen's voice sharpened. "You mean your business partner? I'm sure they'd understand if you took a better opportunity. Everyone has a price." "My partner is also my fiancée," Marcus said. "You might know her, actually. Allison Fletcher." I stepped out from behind the banner in time to see Colleen's face drain of color. Her mouth opened and closed like a fish gasping for air, her composure cracking like expensive porcelain. She backed away from our booth, nearly knocking over a display, and disappeared into the crowd without another word. Marcus pulled up the recording on his phone, showing me Colleen's inadvertent confession about Whitmore Industries' failures. "Your screensaver as requested," he said with a grin, freezing on the frame of her shocked expression. The invitation arrived the following Tuesday in an envelope so thick and expensive it practically screamed desperation. Whitmore Industries' annual gala, their showcase event where they courted investors and celebrated their supposed dominance in various sectors. The address line read, "Ms. A. Fletcher, CEO, Common Core Solutions." Marcus found me at my desk an hour later, still staring at Gregory's signature. Senior Vice President, the same title he'd held throughout our marriage, still warming his father's chair, still waiting for an inheritance that might not exist if the company continued hemorrhaging money. "You don't have to go," Marcus said gently, reading the invitation over my shoulder. I thought about the $43 I'd counted in that motel room. The nights eating instant noodles in the room above Chen's garden. The humiliation of being photographed while packing my belongings. Every blue pin on our map represented a district that had chosen us over them, but this invitation. This was different. "Oh, but I do," I replied, running my finger over the embossed Whitmore Industries logo. "This is what 4 years of 2 a.m. lesson plans built toward. They need us now. Their education division is dying, and we're the only cure they can imagine." Marcus studied my face. "What are you planning?" "I'm not sure yet," I admitted. "But I know I need to be in that room as myself as who I've become. Not for revenge exactly. For closure." I pinned the invitation to our wall map, right in the center where New York should be. Another territory to conquer, or perhaps the final boss level in a game I'd been playing since the day they declared me worthless. Either way, the woman who'd been thrown out with nothing was about to walk back in holding everything. The week before the gala, I stood in a boutique dressing room downtown, running my hands over fabrics that cost more than I'd once made in a month. The saleswoman had initially been skeptical when I walked in wearing my teaching clothes, but her attitude shifted when I selected 3 dresses without checking price tags. The crimson one made me look like power incarnate. Structured shoulders, a neckline that suggested confidence without desperation, fabric that moved like liquid fire. "I'll take this one," I said, handing over my credit card without hesitation. Marcus arranged everything else with quiet efficiency. The private jet booking, the car service, the hotel suite where we could prepare. He understood that this wasn't about displaying wealth. It was about controlling the narrative. Every detail mattered because every detail would be scrutinized. The morning of the gala, I stood before the hotel mirror practicing my introduction. Allison Fletcher, CEO of Common Core Solutions. I repeated it until the words felt natural, until my voice didn't waver on my maiden name. My reflection showed a woman I was still learning to recognize. Shoulders back, chin lifted, eyes that had seen the bottom and chosen to climb rather than crumble. Marcus watched from the doorway, already dressed in his tuxedo. "Your hands," he said quietly. I looked down. They were perfectly still. No trembling, no clenching. The thought of facing the Whitmores no longer triggered the physical response it once had. "They don't scare me anymore," I realized aloud. "They never should have," Marcus replied. "You were always more than they could see." The Cambridge Leather portfolio contained 3 partnership proposals, each one carefully crafted to highlight what we could offer and what Whitmore Industries desperately needed. But more than that, it contained 4 years of evidence that their assessment of my worth had been catastrophically wrong. The Whitmore Hotel ballroom hadn't changed. Same crystal chandeliers, same marble columns, same atmosphere of old money and older prejudices. The invitation had specified arrival between 7 and 8, but we'd calculated our entrance for 7:45, when the room would be full but dinner hadn't yet been served. We paused at the top of the grand staircase. Below, hundreds of people in designer clothing sipped champagne and discussed stock portfolios. The announcer, a young man in a burgundy jacket, looked at our invitation card and spoke into his microphone with practiced clarity. "Ms. Allison Fletcher and Mr. Marcus Reed, Common Core Solutions." The conversation didn't stop all at once. It rippled outward like a stone dropped in still water. I watched faces turn, recognition dawning in waves. Former acquaintances who'd ignored my calls after the divorce now stared openly. Business associates who'd watched Colleen humiliate me at charity events whispered behind their hands. Gregory stood at the bar, his champagne glass frozen halfway to his lips. Patricia Ashford stood beside him in a gold dress that probably cost more than my first year's rent, her face cycling through confusion as she tried to place me. The moment Gregory's expression shifted from casual networking to shocked recognition was worth every sleepless night I'd spent building our company. Colleen had been holding court near the mayor's table, her pearl necklace catching the light as she laughed at someone's comment. She turned at the murmur of voices, her practiced smile still in place until her eyes found mine. The smile didn't fade, it cracked like expensive china under pressure. We descended the stairs slowly, letting the moment breathe. My heels clicked against marble with the same authority Colleen's once had. The crimson dress moved perfectly, commanding attention without begging for it. Marcus's hand at my elbow was steady, grounding. Gregory approached first, his path cutting through the crowd with the desperation of a drowning man reaching for shore. Patricia followed, her gold heels clicking rapid staccato. Up close, I could see the strain around his eyes, the new lines that suggested the family business wasn't the safe harbor it had once been. "Allison." His voice cracked on my name. "But you were worthless." I supplied helpfully, loud enough for the surrounding guests to hear clearly. "Yes, you were quite clear about that. You and your mother both." Fortunately, the market disagreed. His palm was damp when he extended his hand for a shake. I took it briefly, professionally, feeling nothing where once there might have been pain or anger. Patricia's eyes darted between us, calculating, trying to understand the dynamics she'd clearly never been told about. "You're the Common Core Solutions everyone's talking about?" she asked, her voice pitched high with disbelief. "We are," Marcus answered smoothly. "Allison built it from nothing. Quite literally from nothing after your boyfriend there left her with $43 and a suitcase. The color drained from Patricia's face as she turned to Gregory. You said she was irrelevant, I suggested. Embarrassing? Unable to understand business. Colleen materialized from the crowd, her approach less desperate than Gregory's but somehow more brittle. Her voice when she spoke carried a strain I'd never heard before. We had no idea you were involved in this. She gestured vaguely at Marcus and me at our obvious success. I let the silence stretch, watching her discomfort grow. Around us, guests had stopped pretending not to eavesdrop. Everyone loved watching the mighty stumble. I built this from a studio apartment above a Chinese restaurant, I said clearly. After you threw me out with one suitcase and threatened to destroy my teaching career if I didn't leave quietly. Every contract we've won, every district that's chosen us over you, I did that with the teaching degree you called worthless and the determination you never thought I had. Victoria appeared at Colleen's shoulder, tablet in hand, ready to document as always. The same tablet she'd used to photograph my humiliation 4 years ago. She avoided my eyes, but I saw her hands shake slightly. Perhaps we should discuss business, Gregory suggested weakly. The conference room is prepared. The conference room was intended to impress. Leather chairs, panoramic city views, a presentation screen that probably cost more than my first car. The Whitmore board members filed in, men in identical suits who looked at me with curiosity mixed with desperation. They needed us and everyone knew it. I opened my portfolio with deliberate calm, pulling out printed proposals bound in simple covers. No flash, no expensive binding, just substance. Common Core Solutions has successfully captured 40% of your former education market share. I began, clicking to my first slide. We did this by understanding something fundamental that Whitmore Industries missed. Education isn't about pedigree or prestige. It's about recognizing value where others see worthlessness. The slide showed our growth trajectory, each spike corresponding to a district Whitmore had lost. Gregory shrank lower in his chair with each data point. Our success comes from listening to actual teachers, actual students, actual parents, I continued. Not from boardrooms or country clubs, but from classrooms and community centers. Every feature we've developed addresses a real need, not a theoretical one. Victoria took notes on her tablet, the same device she'd once used as a weapon against me. The irony of her documenting my success in the same room where they'd planned my disposal wasn't lost on anyone. These are our partnership proposals, I said, sliding the documents across the mahogany table. You'll find our terms are generous, considering your current position. We're offering you a lifeline, though I'm not sure you deserve one. Colleen's jaw tightened. That's rather unprofessional. So was throwing out your daughter-in-law with nothing because she couldn't give you grandchildren, I replied calmly. So was calling me worthless because I chose to teach instead of becoming your puppet. Professional courtesy is earned, Mrs. Whitmore. You taught me that. The silence in the conference room stretched taut as the Whitmore board members studied our proposals. Gregory's father, James, had joined us halfway through the presentation, his face gray with exhaustion and what looked like resignation. He nodded at me once, a brief acknowledgement of what we both knew, that I'd become everything his family had said I couldn't be. We'll need time to review these terms, one of the board members said, though his tone suggested they had no leverage to negotiate. Of course, I replied, closing my portfolio with calm finality. You have 72 hours. After that, the offer expires and we move forward with our expansion plans without you. Marcus and I stood to leave, but Gregory scrambled from his chair, his composure finally cracking completely. Wait, Allison, could we speak privately? There's nothing private between us anymore, Gregory, I said, but he was already following us toward the door, abandoning whatever dignity he'd been clinging to. The elevator ride down was excruciating in its silence. Gregory stood between us and the door, his hands clenching and unclenching at his sides. When we reached the lobby, he stayed with us, trailing behind like a lost dog as we walked toward the exit where our car waited. The night air was cool against my skin as we stepped outside. That's when Gregory finally broke, grabbing my arm. Something he'd never done during our entire marriage, not even in our worst arguments. Allison, please. His voice cracked with desperation. The company needs this partnership. Without it, we're finished. The board is already questioning our leadership. Mother is He stopped, swallowing hard. Mother is barely holding things together. Through the massive windows behind him, I could see Patricia Ashford watching from the ballroom, her gold dress glittering as she pressed against the glass. Her meal ticket was out here groveling to his ex-wife while she watched her future evaporate. We could work together, Gregory continued, his grip on my arm tightening. You could come back in a different capacity. Senior consultant, maybe even a board position. Think about it, you'd have a say in the company that once threw me out like garbage? I pulled my arm free, feeling nothing where once his touch might have meant everything. The company that declared me worthless? That was a mistake. I see that now. You've proven yourself. You've shown everyone what you're capable of. I looked at this man I'd once loved, who'd signed divorce papers while I slept, who'd laughed when telling his friends about my teaching salary. Behind him, Patricia had been joined by Colleen, both women watching our interaction with naked fear on their faces. I already have a partner, I said, taking Marcus's hand. One who recognized my worth from the beginning. One who saw potential where you saw embarrassment. One who built something with me instead of trying to tear me down. Gregory's face crumpled. You're going to let us fail. After everything, you're going to watch us burn. No, I said quietly. I'm going to build something better on the land where you once stood. There's a difference. Our car pulled up, the driver stepping out to open the door. As Marcus and I settled into the leather seats, I took one last look at Gregory standing on the sidewalk, his tuxedo wrinkled, his face hollow with the realization of what he'd lost. Patricia had come outside now, her voice shrill as she demanded to know what I'd said. Colleen stood in the doorway, her pearl necklace catching the light, her empire crumbling around her. The jet was waiting at the private airfield, its engines humming with quiet power. As we climbed aboard, I pulled out my tablet and opened the folder containing the Whitmore proposals. 3 documents that could save their company, that could give them the lifeline they desperately needed. Marcus watched as I selected all 3 files and moved them to the trash. No second thoughts? None, I said, emptying the trash permanently. They had their chance to recognize value. They chose cruelty instead. They'll probably fail without us, he observed, accepting champagne from the flight attendant. Yes, they will. I looked out the window as we lifted off, the city lights spreading below us like a circuit board. But I'm not thinking about their failure. I'm thinking about Miguel Rodriguez, who's going to graduate high school with honors because our app helped him stay on track. About Amy Chin, who's already building her own educational apps at 12. About the thousands of teachers who finally have tools that respect their expertise instead of undermining it. Marcus raised his glass. To building instead of burning. To becoming who we were meant to be. 6 months later, I was reviewing our quarterly reports when my phone rang. Diana's name on the screen made me pause. We'd reconnected properly after the legal threats expired, but she rarely called during business hours. Have you seen the news? She asked without preamble. I hadn't. I'd stopped following business news that wasn't directly relevant to our work. Diana sent me a link and I read it while she stayed on the line. Whitmore Industries had filed for bankruptcy. The education division had collapsed first, taking the rest of the company with it. During the audit, investigators had discovered Gregory's embezzlement, years of funneling money to offshore accounts, exactly as Diana had documented. There's more, Diana said quietly. Colleen lost everything. The penthouse, the estate, all of it went to pay creditors. Gregory's facing criminal charges. And Patricia Ashford, she left him the moment the money ran out. Apparently she's already engaged to someone else. I waited for the satisfaction to hit, for the vindication to wash over me. That I felt nothing. They were irrelevant now, like a book I'd closed and would never need to read again. Allison? Are you okay? I'm perfect, I said and meant it. They're just the past. That afternoon, I stood before 500 teachers at our first annual Common Core Solutions Education Summit. The convention center was packed with educators who'd traveled from across the country to share ideas and learn from each other. Marcus had insisted on covering travel costs for teachers from Title I schools, and we just announced that those same schools would receive our software free of charge permanently. In the front row sat my former students from Riverside Elementary. Miguel Rodriguez, now 17 and headed to college on a full scholarship. Amy Chin, already running her own coding club for younger students. Timothy, Sarah, and a dozen others who'd grown into remarkable young people. Principal Lawson sat with them, tears streaming down her face as I announced our new foundation for supporting teacher-led innovation. 4 years ago, I said, looking out at the sea of faces, someone told me I was worthless because I chose teaching over wealth. They said I was incomplete because I couldn't meet their expectations. They threw me out with nothing but a suitcase and the certainty that I would fail. The room was silent, hundreds of teachers hanging on every word. They were wrong about my worth, but they were right about one thing: I was incomplete. Not because I lacked what they valued, but because I hadn't yet discovered what I was capable of building. Every challenge you face in your classrooms, every student who struggles, every resource you lack, these aren't signs of failure. They're opportunities to build something better. As I spoke about transformation through education, about the power of recognizing value where others see worthlessness, I realized the truth that had taken me 4 years to understand. The greatest revenge was never about their destruction. It was about my construction. It was about becoming someone they could never have imagined, then moving forward into a future where they simply didn't exist. The applause washed over me as I concluded my speech, but I was already thinking ahead. Marcus and I had plans for international expansion, for reaching students in countries where educational resources were even scarcer. We had partnerships to build, innovations to develop, lives to change. The Whitmores were history. My story was just beginning. If this story of transformation and triumph kept you captivated until the very end, hit that like button right now. My favorite part was when Allison walked into the Whitmore Gala as a CEO, watching their faces realize the worthless teacher had become their only hope. What was your favorite moment? Drop it in the comments below. Don't miss more powerful stories like this. Subscribe and hit that notification bell so you never miss an upload.